It was a crisp, golden Monday morning in Arlington, Virginia, the kind of morning where the air carries a dignified sharpness, the sky wears a flawless hue of late autumn blue, and the sun's early light spills onto buildings like a quiet, reverent hymn. Lieutenant General Amanda Royce, a towering figure not only in physical presence but also in military stature, was en route to a high-security, closed-door national security briefing at the Pentagon. She was not only the first black woman to command a division of cyber operations within the United States Army. She was a symbol of progress forged through decades of grit, brilliance, and sacrifice. Her history read like an epic, a child of the civil rights generation, raised in Atlanta by educators and activists, a West Point graduate who defied expectations at every turn, a technical prodigy turned battlefield commander who transitioned into cyber warfare long before the Pentagon fully grasped its strategic primacy. That morning, dressed in a sharply tailored gray suit that blended the command of power with civilian elegance, General Royce sat behind the wheel of her sleek black government-issued SUV, her military ID secured in her inner breast pocket, her briefcase containing encrypted mission updates, intelligence reports, and classified digital briefings strapped to the back seat. As she navigated smoothly through the ebb and flow of early traffic, listening to a secure call briefing her on the meeting's agenda, her mind was focused, razor-sharp, and utterly calm. Her vehicle was fitted with low-profile diplomatic plates, and while she chose to drive herself, rather than use a detail that morning believing in modesty, autonomy, and presence, her command was unmistakable to anyone who had encountered her before. But just 4 blocks from the Pentagon's heavily fortified perimeter, at an intersection bordered by an unassuming strip of offices and a chain pharmacy, the shrill flash of red and blue lights suddenly lit up behind her. With a momentary glance, in the rearview mirror she furrowed her brow, not out of panic but curiosity. She wasn't speeding, hadn't run a light, and certainly hadn't made any erratic maneuvers. Yet 2 cruisers, both unmarked save for the aggressive illumination of their lights, pulled up swiftly, boxing in her SUV from the rear and driver's side. Within seconds, 2 officers stepped out, one with a hand resting on his holster, the other speaking into a shoulder mic, their body language hard and taut. Royce pulled over promptly, rolled down her window, and placed both hands on the steering wheel in full view, as protocol taught her to do even before she had rank. She greeted the approaching officer with respectful composure. "Good morning, officer. Can I help you?" The response was terse, almost rehearsed, an accusation of suspicious activity, though when pressed for clarification, the officer offered only vague references to a vehicle matching a stolen car report. Before Royce could fully explain who she was, or reach for her military ID, one of the officers ordered her to exit the vehicle. She did so with reluctant compliance, stating her name and rank, keeping her tone firm but calm. "I am Lieutenant General Amanda Royce, United States Army. I'm on my way to a secure briefing at the Pentagon. My ID is in my jacket. May I retrieve it for you?" But her words may as well have been spoken into a void. The officer barked back, "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. Keep your hands visible." The second officer moved in quickly, took her by the arm and without provocation, without warning, spun her around and snapped cold metal cuffs onto her wrists. She did not resist. There was no need. She stood still, her breath slow, eyes narrowed, posture dignified despite the humiliation. She did not raise her voice. She simply said, "You are making a serious mistake." The briefcase remained untouched in the car. Her phone buzzed unanswered inside her jacket pocket. A few pedestrians had gathered on the sidewalk, some already lifting phones to record the event. At least one person could be heard gasping upon hearing her introduce herself again, louder this time, insisting, "I am a 3-star general in the United States Army. You are detaining me without cause." One of the officers muttered something about possible identity theft or fraudulent credentials. The other continued a search of the vehicle without a warrant, prying open compartments, pulling open the back door. He paused briefly when he saw the secured government laptop, the encrypted badge clipped to the leather folder, the Pentagon-issued device in the console, the rows of cyber-military documents coded in ways beyond his understanding. Meanwhile, Roy stood silently on the sidewalk, her wrists growing sore beneath the cuffs, her voice steady as she requested they call in her ID number to Federal Dispatch or contact Pentagon Security. But they didn't. It wasn't until a third cruiser arrived and a senior officer stepped out, recognizing her name from the brief radio exchanges, that the tension broke like a fever. The superior walked briskly over, took one look at the ID that had finally been retrieved from her jacket, and his face turned ashen. "General Royce," he said aghast, "I deeply apologize. There has been a terrible mistake." He motioned quickly to the arresting officers, who fumbled with the cuffs as they removed them. But the damage had already been done. Her wrists bore the red marks of unlawful restraint. The surrounding crowd had grown, phones still recording. One bystander could be heard asking, "Did they really just arrest a general?" Royce looked at the senior officer, expression hard. "Get me a phone," she said. He complied instantly, handing over his department-issued device. She stepped a few paces away, her voice low but laced with quiet thunder, as she said the words that would ripple through the Pentagon's stone walls in less than 10 minutes. "This is Lieutenant General Amanda Royce. I need to be patched through to the Pentagon Chief of Staff. Priority 1. The phone was transferred immediately. She spoke in clipped, clear detail, reciting names, badge numbers, vehicle IDs, location coordinates. She ended the call with, "Secure the area, retrieve the footage, and notify Defense Intelligence." This wasn't just a traffic stop. Within 30 minutes, internal alerts were triggered across DC's most classified systems. An unauthorized detainment of a top-level military official was a national security breach, regardless of whether it was born of prejudice, incompetence, or both. Meanwhile, the officers stood in silent disbelief as Royce returned to her SUV without another word, adjusted her suit sleeves, and drove off toward the Pentagon gates, her bearing unchanged, her mission undeterred, but her silence now loud, enough to shake the foundations of every room she entered from that day forward. By the dawn of the following day, the incident that had unfolded mere hours earlier near the Pentagon, the wrongful detention and handcuffing of Lieutenant General Amanda Royce, had erupted from a localized confrontation into a full-blown national controversy, a viral flashpoint that penetrated the usual defenses of media cycles and political spin. It started quietly enough, with a handful of eyewitness videos captured on smartphones trickling onto social media platforms, their grainy footage showing a composed, dignified black woman in full military bearing being restrained in cuffs by uniformed officers whose demeanor oscillated between suspicion and abrupt realization. But as the clips circulated and commentary swelled, journalists and civil rights advocates dug deeper, uncovering the story behind the moment. A 3-star general, decorated with honors from multiple overseas tours, a woman who had risen through the ranks by sheer merit and intellect, was not only mistaken for a criminal, but treated with blatant disregard for her rank and service on the very doorstep of the institution she had dedicated her life to protecting. This wasn't merely a case of procedural error, it was a symbol of systemic failure, a reflection of how racial bias and ignorance persisted in the institutions meant to safeguard American citizens and values. Civil rights organizations swiftly mobilized, issuing formal statements demanding transparency and accountability, while prominent activists called for immediate reforms in police training and military-civil relations. The Defense Department, recognizing the gravity of the incident and its potential impact on military morale and public trust, broke its typical protocol of guarded silence to release a rare and unequivocal statement. The department lauded General Royce's service and leadership, condemning the incident as unacceptable and deeply troubling, pledging a full internal investigation into the circumstances that had led to the wrongful detainment. Within the ranks of the local police department, the response was equally swift, if less harmonious. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation targeting the 2 officers directly involved. As their histories were reviewed, one officer who had a previously unblemished record chose to resign before disciplinary proceedings could begin, a move interpreted by many as an acknowledgement of culpability or an attempt to avoid public scrutiny. The other officer's record, however, told a more troubling story. Multiple prior complaints of racial profiling, use of excessive force, and failure to follow procedural safeguards had been quietly filed over years, only to be dismissed or minimized by supervisors. Faced with this history and the new public outrage sparked by the high-profile incident, the department made the rare decision to terminate his employment. The police chief, under intense pressure from the media and community leaders, issued a public apology, expressing regret for the distressing and inappropriate handling of the situation and affirming a commitment to review training protocols and bias awareness programs. Yet despite these official responses, the apology did little to assuage the anger and pain expressed by many across the nation. Those who saw in the event a painful reminder that even the highest-ranking black military officials were not immune to the prejudices and systemic injustices woven into the fabric of law enforcement. Conversations erupted nationwide about the intersection of race, power, and respect, especially within the military and police spheres traditionally dominated by rigid hierarchy and protocol. The incident sparked renewed debates in Congress, with several lawmakers demanding hearings to examine police conduct, racial bias in security clearances, and the protection of military personnel in civilian jurisdictions. Media outlets delved into General Royce's distinguished career, profiling her rise through the ranks and highlighting her achievements in cyber defense operations, positioning her not only as a military trailblazer, but as a symbol of resilience and professionalism in the face of adversity. Interviews with her colleagues revealed the respect she commanded and the impact she had made on military strategy and national security. Meanwhile, General Royce herself remained composed, speaking publicly only when necessary and using her platform to call for systemic change rather than personal retribution. She underscored that her experience, while deeply painful, was emblematic of a larger problem, one that required courage, education, and institutional reform to overcome. Her words resonated widely, galvanizing activists and lawmakers alike to push for comprehensive anti-bias training, better communication channels between military and police agencies, and enhanced accountability measures. The ripples of the incident extended beyond the immediate fallout, influencing recruitment and retention efforts within both the military and law enforcement as organizations grappled with how to rebuild trust and demonstrate genuine commitment to equity and respect. Training academies began incorporating new modules on cultural competence, implicit bias, and the importance of recognizing and respecting military ranks and identities in civilian interactions. At the same time, public discourse around the event reflected a painful duality: pride in General Royce's achievements and leadership alongside frustration and grief that such an incident could occur in the 21st century, so close to the halls of the nation's most secure military installation. For many, the incident was a stark reminder of the ongoing work necessary to bridge divides between communities, law enforcement, and the armed forces. Work that required not only policy changes, but a fundamental shift in attitudes and awareness. As the investigation proceeded, the Pentagon increased its liaison efforts with local law enforcement agencies, instituting new protocols for verifying the identities of military personnel in sensitive areas and enhancing communication channels to prevent misunderstandings. General Royce's call to the Pentagon in the immediate aftermath of her detainment was hailed as a decisive act of leadership that brought rapid attention to a dangerous failure in procedure and respect, ultimately triggering changes that may save others from similar indignities. The officers involved, though they lost their careers, became symbols in the public imagination, not as villains alone, but as cautionary examples of how bias unchecked can corrode the very institutions designed to protect and serve. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to evolve, becoming a touchstone in conversations about race, authority, and justice in America, reminding the nation that progress is neither guaranteed nor linear, but the result of persistent, courageous calls for accountability and change. By the time dawn broke the following day, the story of Lieutenant General Amanda Royce's wrongful detainment had transcended the confines of a single police precinct and spread like wildfire across national news outlets, social media platforms, and political corridors, igniting fierce debates about race, respect, authority, and justice in America. What the general public was only beginning to grasp, however, was that this incident was far more than a case of mistaken identity or an unfortunate police error. It was a stark illumination of systemic failures that ran deep within law enforcement agencies and societal structures, where racial prejudice and implicit bias could override rank, service, and dignity, even when displayed by a three-star general whose decades of military service had included multiple combat tours overseas, and who had dedicated her life to defending the nation on the front lines of cyber warfare and national security, making the affront not just a personal indignity, but a symbolic wound inflicted on the very ideals the country claims to uphold. As the footage of her being handcuffed and restrained without cause circulated endlessly, accompanied by eyewitness accounts, official responses, and social media commentary, civil rights leaders and advocacy groups quickly mobilized, calling for thorough investigations and systemic reforms, denouncing the treatment of General Royce as yet another example of racial injustice embedded in law enforcement practices and demanding accountability for those responsible. The Defense Department, recognizing both the gravity of the incident and its potential to damage military morale and public trust, issued an unusually forceful statement, publicly expressing unequivocal support for General Royce, praising her exemplary service, and condemning the actions of the officers involved as unacceptable, assuring the American people that a full and transparent internal inquiry had been initiated to address the circumstances that led to such a humiliating and unlawful detainment of a high-ranking military official. Simultaneously, the local police department faced intense scrutiny, with Internal Affairs launching an immediate investigation into the conduct of the two officers who had stopped and handcuffed General Royce. As their personnel records and disciplinary histories were reviewed, troubling patterns emerged. One officer, apparently overwhelmed by the escalating backlash and aware of potential disciplinary consequences, submitted his resignation preemptively, avoiding formal proceedings, while the other faced termination after records revealed a disturbing history of complaints involving racial profiling, excessive force, and failure to adhere to proper protocol during stops and detainments, underscoring the departmental failures in addressing such behaviors effectively. The police chief, under mounting pressure from community leaders, media, and the public, issued a formal apology, expressing deep regret over the distressing and inappropriate handling of the situation and pledging to implement improved training and accountability measures within the force. But his words, while necessary, were insufficient to stem the tide of outrage and sorrow that rippled through communities across the nation who saw in General Royce's experience a reflection of their own daily encounters with suspicion, discrimination, and injustice. The incident quickly became a catalyst for widespread public discourse on the intersectionality of race, power, and respect, especially within institutions like the military and police, where hierarchy and protocol often clash with lived realities of bias and discrimination. Lawmakers at both federal and state levels responded with calls for hearings and legislative action aimed at improving law enforcement training on cultural competency, implicit bias, and the recognition of military personnel's unique status and protections. Media profiles of General Royce multiplied, painting a portrait of a woman whose distinguished career had shattered ceilings and paved the way for countless others, while simultaneously spotlighting the painful reality that even those who reach the highest ranks are not immune to racial prejudice and institutional failures. Interviews with her colleagues and subordinates revealed deep admiration for her leadership, strategic mind, and unwavering commitment to the nation, amplifying the tragedy of her treatment and fueling demands for justice and reform. General Royce herself, embodying the dignity and strength that had defined her career, chose to speak out with measured clarity and purpose, emphasizing that the incident was not about her alone, but about the systemic issues that continued to plague law enforcement and military relations, calling for constructive dialogue, education, and institutional transformation rather than vengeance. Her words resonated with a broad audience, including activists, lawmakers, military personnel, and everyday citizens, galvanizing a coalition committed to addressing the root causes of bias and promoting a culture of respect and accountability. In the weeks following the incident, the fallout extended beyond the immediate parties involved. influencing recruitment and retention efforts within both the military and police, as organizations grappled with how to restore trust and demonstrate genuine commitment to equity and respect, prompting training academies nationwide to incorporate new curricula focusing on cultural awareness, implicit bias, and the critical importance of recognizing and honoring the identities and ranks of military personnel during civilian interactions. The public discourse revealed a painful duality: pride in General Royce's achievements and leadership juxtaposed with collective frustration and grief that such an incident could occur in modern America, especially at the doorstep of the nation's most secure military installation. For many, the episode was a stark reminder of the ongoing work needed to bridge divides between communities, law enforcement, and the armed forces, work that required not only policy changes, but a fundamental shift in attitudes, awareness, and institutional culture. As the investigation into the officers' conduct progressed, the Pentagon ramped up its liaison efforts with local police departments, instituting new protocols designed to verify identities more reliably, enhance communication between military and civilian law enforcement, and prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. General Royce's decisive call to the Pentagon immediately after her release was hailed as an act of leadership and clarity that brought rapid attention to a dangerous and disrespectful failure in procedure, ultimately catalyzing changes that promised to protect others from comparable indignities. While the officers involved faced personal consequences, including loss of employment and public censure, they also became cautionary symbols, illustrating how unchecked bias and procedural neglect can erode the very foundations of trust and professionalism critical to public safety. As national conversations continued to unfold, the incident remained a potent touchstone for debates about race, authority, and justice in America, reminding the nation that progress requires persistent, courageous advocacy, systemic reform, and collective will to confront uncomfortable truths. In the final analysis, the wrongful detainment of Lieutenant General Amanda Royce became more than a headline or viral video. It became a watershed moment that challenged institutions to live up to their promises and inspired a renewed commitment to justice, respect, and equality in the years to come. General Amanda Royce had never sought the spotlight. Throughout her distinguished career, she had led quietly with unshakable discipline, intellect, and a steadfast commitment to service that earned her the respect of peers, subordinates, and superiors alike. But when the world's attention was forced upon her following the wrongful handcuffing incident near the Pentagon, she harnessed that attention with the same precision and calm she displayed in command, transforming personal humiliation into a clarion call for systemic change that would echo far beyond that moment. In a televised interview that captivated the nation, Royce spoke not with bitterness or anger, but with a piercing clarity that cut through political rhetoric and social division. If I had been wearing my uniform that day, would they have recognized me? Why is it that rank or medals must be visible for someone to be treated with basic respect and dignity? Her question struck a profound chord, resonating deeply within military ranks, law enforcement communities, and the general public alike, sparking impassioned discussions about the meaning of respect, the persistence of racial bias, and the need to reevaluate the relationship between civilian police and military personnel. Over the ensuing months, her measured yet powerful words galvanized policymakers, activists, and institutions, driving sweeping federal reforms designed to address the very issues her experience had exposed. New training protocols were mandated across major law enforcement agencies nationwide, emphasizing unconscious bias recognition, cultural competence, and respect for military ranks and identities. Accountability measures were strengthened, ensuring that officers failing to adhere to these standards faced tangible consequences. The legacy of the officers who had detained her was sealed by their lost careers, but more importantly, their actions ignited a reform movement that reverberated through the corridors of power and community alike. The ripple effects touched every major police department, reshaping policies and attitudes, fostering partnerships between military leadership and civilian law enforcement, and building frameworks aimed at preventing future indignities and injustices against those who serve the nation in uniform. Throughout it all, General Royce remained a symbol of dignity and resilience, refusing to engage in calls for revenge or retribution. Instead, she consistently advocated for justice, education, and systemic transformation, recognizing that true progress demanded more than punishment. It required enlightenment and change in hearts and minds. Her example inspired countless others, especially women and people of color in uniform, reaffirming the possibility of leadership marked by strength and grace under pressure. The narrative of her ordeal evolved from a story of wrongful detainment into a broader testament to the power of courage and integrity to transform adversity into progress. General Royce's voice became a beacon, illuminating the path toward a more just, respectful, and inclusive future for both the military and civilian sectors. In the end, she did not merely reclaim her dignity. She expanded the definition of respect and accountability for all who dedicate their lives to service, ensuring that her experience would not be an isolated injustice, but a catalyst for lasting change that strengthened the very institutions she embodied and protected.